And welcome back to the Thought Vessel. Today, we're going to dive into some interesting parts of removal topics, how to figure out where you're heading, how much removal is enough removal today. My name's Jacobi.
I'm Levi.
And I'm Joe.
And this is the Thought Vessel. Welcome to the show. Pardon the interesting introduction. I know I'm switching it up. I stole Levi's spotlight. He can have it back later.
How dare.
Today, I'm discussing a topic that has been kind of burning a hole in my pocket, so to speak. I ran an experiment over the course of a number of weeks and months. I tried to get as wide of a pool of information as I could for this. Today, we're discussing how much removal really is enough removal, determining what that means, where you can draw the line, where maybe you should draw the line.
I certainly have an idea of what should be like the minimum amount of removal and what should just be enough in my mind after listening to so many ways to build decks.
That's very true. What prompted this topic?
I had this interesting dilemma where in a lot of the pods I would be in, the answer I tend to hear whenever a situation arises, whoever was the victor tended to have the opinion, hey, you should run a bit more removal deck. And this turn of key of phrase where you should just run more removal being the answer to a lot of the problems they wanted to portray got me really thinking. I'm like, okay, they think that people need more removal. I need more removal. They fan through my deck. They see, oh, you have this, this, and this. Not quite there. For this experiment, I decided to take that particular dilemma and cast it at 11.
Oh, so you ran 11 removal pieces.
No, 36.
Jesus!
I made a deck with 36 pieces of removal. For this experiment, I looked at this and I was like, we have to clearly define removal.
Who was the commander of the deck?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had made a deck for most brackets, with the exception of CDH. Most of the brackets had a minimum of 3 colors. For my lower brackets, it was all going to be in Esper. And for my mid bracket, the 3s-ish, a little bit of the 4, I went with Grixis.
Who was the actual commander? You said Esper and Grixis.
For the Esper deck, I had a couple of options. The first option I went with was Y'shtola. I kept that one for a lot of parts between 3 and 2. I didn't go completely crazy with all of the best versions of anything, even though I could have. These 30-some removal pieces did not include free counter spells, free exile target creature, any of the absolutely just, oh, I will probably always have type stuff.
But like any ubiquitously good, such as Stroke of Midnight or Generous Gift, the new one from Edge of Eternities that gives them a lander.
Exactly. A lot of the removal that a little bit of a caveat. Oh, I sword step but you gained life, or I plowshared it and then now you get a land. I blew up your thing but you get a creature. A lot of removal that still let the game progress, not just grind to a halt, because it didn't make sense to have the experiment just be me grinding out against people forever. The objective was how much is enough removal.
What about the Grixis commander, since you did shift from Esper to Grixis?
I had made a pair of Grixis commanders. The first Grixis commander was Marchesa the Black Rose. The deck didn't run super creature heavy, obviously, but it did have a few of the, and this builds on the idea that removal isn't just counterspell or destroy stuff. It ran some of the interesting ETB effects that counted as removal to me, where it's like, this enters, kill some stuff. And then when you try to answer my creatures, they just come back and do more of the thing.
Since the Throne Marchesa is just, oh, hey, it had a counter on it, bring it back.
And then the other Grixis control I went for the very heavy-handed Kess deck. That was the bracket 4.
Kess Dissident
Just-
Mage, a tried and
Yeah.
true powerful commander.
That used to be a CDH deck, if I recall. And then obviously we just got better stuff.
You still see it on the fringes.
Now, the Kess deck did run the free removal package. It had the better counter spells. It was at the bracket where it's like, this is justified. I'm going to go there. For this experiment, we defined removal as any card that had a interaction that disrupted or canceled out another player's actions. If I blew up your creature, you can't attack with it. That's obviously removal. Removing things from the board. Counter spells are considered removal in this particular instance. They deny a person their actions. And then certain styles of cancellation, cards that just say, hey, you no longer get to make this game action. I count it as interaction. An example that's kind of fringe would be Vexing Shusher. Telling you you cannot counter my spells counted as interaction for this experiment.
Okay.
Was there any kind of Thoughtseize-like effects?
Yes.
Denying the
And-
pieces in their hands.
The higher bracket decks ran Thoughtseize styled things because it's just easier to do in a Slinger style deck for my own sake. I waited to do more of the Thoughtseize styled interaction until I was in the higher bracket because that's where I'm comfortable doing it at a consistent rate. And this experiment consisted of 50 games.
That's a good sample size for an experiment.
I tried. My conclusion is that for the majority of people, I find that there is not an answer that is satisfactory.
36 pieces of removal. And people are like, no, run more.
Yeah.
When you're asking these questions, was it like after the game? How many of those like were you winning versus losing?
My total win rate over the 50 games was about, I want to say 46% ish. I don't remember the exact percentage. It was lower than 50.
But that's still pretty high if it's 4-player games.
It got higher as I went into higher tiers. The vast majority of my wins were with a Kess deck. The Kess deck won all but 2 of its games. The lower tier decks lost almost all of their games.
I could see that. Typically at higher levels, they're going to also have a little bit higher removal or interaction on their end. And that's not necessarily going to immediately beat what you're doing. And especially if your game plan revolves around only a small number of things that you could probably just get back with the other cards in your deck.
At the beginning of each experimental run, I would clarify with the table, hey, I have this deck. I am doing a social experiment. I'm going to ask you some questions after the game's over. Treat it like any other game until then. Nothing's different. I'm not here to rustle your feathers, but I'm trying to gather some data. Everyone, for the most part, had no issues. Everyone was happy to partake. And I got a lot of good, decent answers. And then I would reveal what the experiment was. And some people felt a bit shaky. They didn't necessarily like the answer they gave me, not understanding the context.
Well, that's the point of that
think
kind of
that's-
experience.
I think that's fair. I feel like if I had a deck that's running 36 pieces of interaction, if my opponent did that, I feel like I would want to know that's the case going into it. Just assuming that everything you have is probably going to die.
But at the same token, for the point of an experiment, you cannot have the people who are participating in that study know that's what's happening. That's why any good report on any kind of scientific experiment will have those people go into it blind and then explain after the fact what the entire thing was. Even in like double blind studies where even the experimenter doesn't even know what's going on, that can still provide a lot of good data.
Originally, my size pool of games was 60 games, but I had to discount 10 of those games because I tried to preemptively give some people the heads up in an attempt to see what would change. And the dynamic of the game became focused on having to sit there and hold up interaction for my interaction. They were too focused on the fact that I was committing an experiment on removal and not just playing the game as the game is intended. It became a showdown between the guy who wanted data and the guy who didn't want to offer an interesting take. They just wanted to be like, you're doing removal, therefore I'm going to do this all and just deal with you. And that's the only objective I have.
If you tell your subjects, they're obviously going to act differently. It's in the same strain as if you told someone who really likes the limelight, we're just doing some kind of shooting here, try not to pay attention to the camera, and they always will, because they're trying to get their shot.
With that being said, my first low tier number of games, we would get through the game. I think on average, it was kind of evenly spread, you could say, between tiers 2 and 3. I only had a few tier 1 games. I exchanged like a couple of cards like Soul Ring and stuff out. So I was like, all right, I can weaken this by removing some of these like rocks. I'm an Esper, so I don't have to be necessarily fast. That can work, it's fine. In most of those games that I would lose, we'd have our after table discussion. What did you guys think of the game? And they would share some of their opinions, some being, yeah, this person was a real problem. One particular instance was a Naya deck, a Rin and Ciri deck, got ahead really fast. They had a lot of creatures. Not really anyone else at the table ran more than a few interaction pieces. And I kind of was left to single them out in a sense. And even through me singling them out, because the Esper deck participating at a lower tier just did not have the gas, I could only remove so many things. Their deck was consistent enough that, haha, I'm in Naya.
Specifically, it's the Brian Kibler method, because Brian Kibler has talked about this, of how he doesn't run interaction. He just runs more good stuff, and you will either remove it or he'll win.
Exactly. A lot of the lower tier games function very highly on that particular theorem, very consistently, I find. I think out of the 25 games between 2 and 3 in the bracket system, most of those games were either completely swayed by the person who had the most value in their deck or won by the person who had all of the value in their deck. They didn't run a whole lot of, oh, I'm going to deal with this, this, or this. They just ran a lot of answer this or die.
That sounds very much like the Levi strategy of winning games. Answer this or die.
Unlike a lot of games where I participate with Levi, they didn't carry a lot of safety nets Levi likes to do, which is what makes it really hard to interact with a board like that. It felt different to actually have my removal matter in certain aspects, because a lot of instances in the higher tiers where people answer the single target removals, I had 36 because I had broad removal too. I focused heavily on making sure both could apply to answer Hexproof and Shroud, because that was a very big contradiction to my experiment. If I go, yeah, I have all this, it all has to targets, like it just would not function that way.
Did anyone stick something like a privileged position on the board in
Yes.
those games?
I had
And what
3
happened
of
to the
the 50 games with a privileged position, 2 of which were higher tier. And in the higher tier ones, I had to depend on a more broad answer. I focused more on my board wipes and finding things that answered specific types of problems. In the Kess game, where a person had privileged position, they managed to get onto the board by cheating it. I don't quite remember how. This was an artifact enchantment style deck. It had a few enchantments that were just, hey, all of my stuff is safe. Mana, value, card draw, etc., etc. It was a Brea that had a few other things. It didn't have the privileged position, but I had things like Vandal Blast for decks similar to it. The tier 4 deck was a Rocco Street Chef deck.
Out of
So,
CDH into bracket 4.
right.
Rocco Street Chef or
Yes.
Rocco Cabrera Caterer?
Street Chef.
Oh, wait. Yeah, no, that's the Aftermath Rocco. Okay.
Yes.
Huh.
So it did a lot of things with the food that it had. It tried to do some interesting things with lands. It was really, really hell bent on going very fast and just having a little bit of the caveat of, yeah, if Rocco's still out here, we'll do some fun stuff. And if he's not, I don't care. He's a silly little lad.
Silly little lad describing Rocco is an interesting turn of phrase.
Yeah, I thought the same thing when he said that, but you know what? We let it slide.
It's just like how the new flip card, Fleam, that's just a silly little guy that also does breach shit.
This particular Rocco deck went very all in on the fact that it kept doing food stuff. It kept trying to turn the food into other types of value. It was an interesting deck. I wouldn't say particularly like game-breakingly strong, but interesting and deserving of its bracket 4 title. I was fortunate enough that Kess had things like Vandal Blast. It had things like mass removal on specific ways to get around stuff like Perfect Position. I ran into it a lot less considering the decks I tend to have fought were along the Naya color branch. And a lot of them really would have enjoyed a Privileged Position, they just didn't have it. Assuming because it's a 5 mana enchantment that just says, don't touch my stuff.
Yeah, but even then, 100 cards, if you're not always getting your tutors, you're not always going to see it. It makes sense.
I did run into a lot of sHoUlD. sHoUlD was everywhere.
That definitely would shut down a lot of interaction.
I definitely ran into a lot of sHoUlD, and it really tested my timings and discerning how convinced I was that I needed to deal with a thing then or a thing later. It was an interesting dynamic to confront sHoUlD with a deck with removal. It became a contest of patience because when they noticed I wasn't nervous about the sHoUlD and they saw me do some removal things, it really tested their brain.
Don't you just love the look of worry of your opponents when they do something really scary and they should be like, yeah, I'm on top of the world. And you just see across the table one player just remaining calm. It's going to shake a lot of players.
People definitely are very skittish when you attempt to remove theirs. They don't hate it until it's their stuff in the way.
I think that's just only natural. You have loss aversion is a very real thing where you have people that invest their time and money into getting this thing on the field and they want to get a chance to play with it. If it gets countered or removed right away, I'm sure it doesn't feel the best. I don't think anyone like really enjoys getting things removed. They might understand it. Yeah, it's coma. It's scary. That probably needs to go. But they're like necessarily fired up about it either.
No, absolutely not. I wouldn't say they should be either.
At the end of all of these games, what was the majority of the answers of the questions that you asked?
Question 1, how did you feel about the amount of removal? Was it enough? Was it annoying? Did you find it interesting, interactive, etc.? 38 of the 50 games, the player in the lead made a comment saying, I don't think you have quite enough, and I found your interactions kind of stale.
Wow.
What is stale interaction?
They get really tired of seeing the same kind of removal. Their answer was, yeah, you ran Counterspell. Cool. They thought the idea of having very broad removal to be meh.
Do they get tired of seeing Forest or Command Tower?
Yeah.
You know, there is no pleasing some people.
Indeed. It was interesting to find out that they both found it just not enough and just boring and stale.
I don't get that. That's actually a little bit bonkers, but I can probably understand because they just don't realize that, hey, some people don't have it. And I still have a game strategy, my guy.
When they were describing the feelings they had, they named the very generic cards as like some of their like, what mega whatever. They looked at Counterspell the card and went, oh yeah, so original. And that was their vibe. And then when it wasn't that, it was just, yeah, you didn't have quite enough. Here's an off the cuff counterspell. Weird suggestions, cards that I normally would be very pleased to hear that didn't make sense when I fan out the deck and I point out what I did have. Of the 38, 15 people got upset, and then the rest of them did not.
A little under half.
The half that got upset, I found were bothered because they thought they were giving me interesting ideas and this is me teaching you moment. And then I go, okay, I appreciate the input. Fan out the deck. Here's all of my removal. Here's what the deck's designed to do. And with your input in mind, this is what I did do. What are your thoughts? I had 3 people say nothing, get up and leave. I had 6 people look at my removal, get very frustrated because some of the things that they don't like in removal were in the deck. Like one of the lower tier decks, they saw that I didn't have mana drain. Instead of it was a weird 2 mana counterspell. And I thought that opinion was very peculiar because I did not consider mana drain a tier 2 or a tier 3 card, but he did.
Isn't it also?
I mean, it's not a game changer technically, but it's not right now,
Right.
which is strange. There's not a lot of rituals on the game changers list. It's a great card. If it goes on the game changer list, I don't think anyone would be surprised, but
No.
it's not currently there.
But yeah, so I had the 3 walk away, the 6 that got upset, and then the remaining 6 looked at it and they wanted to workshop my removal in a way that was more conducive to their line of thinking. They're like, I don't like your removal. Here's the removal I would sub in. Like, still trying to press the teaching moment after I've explained the experiment.
You are asking their opinion and stuff.
100%. But the way they went about it was an agitated, why would you do this? You should, and started like fanning things out. This is bad. You shouldn't do this. X, Y, and Z. The last 6 had a valid opinion, but their attempts of going about it were from a disgruntled nature. It wasn't oh, here's some helpful information. It's why would you do this? Clearly, you should have done this experiment this way. The idea of backhanding your knowledge by presenting it as a teaching moment.
Yeah, and for those people, I would just say, do your own experiment. That's the whole point of experiments, is that you don't just run the one. We come to you with the one experiment that we did, and to validate or disprove, you have to run your own. That's the whole point of experiments. And that's why we keep running even basic experiments with children to show how the world's round, how space is the way it is. All of the cool different science things you do is done because we have run these experiments. We have shown that they have become true, and we will teach you how to set up those experiments so that you don't get bad info.
Or sometimes it's just we learn something new, therefore this may not be correct anymore. The world of science. The world was flat. Using leeches was an effective way to cure medicine. We've kind of gone back and forth. Mercury was being injected into people and stuff. We learn as we go. People were put on this planet and just kind of had to figure all this out as we go and kind of stand on the shoulders of each other to evolve. I think it's definitely a good jumping off.
Absolutely. Of the 38 that told me I needed more room, that was 15. Thankfully, the majority, after understanding this is the experiment, here's the factors, here's what I was doing, had positive feedback. They had interesting opinions. That was a teaching moment in etiquette, not skill. They went, oh, okay. So I noticed while you were doing this, now that I understand the experiment, I think you should have been more liberal here. I saw that I had this trouble piece, but this thing was probably more important. Things that I just in retrospect, every game went, now that we're talking it out, you're very right. But they were still on the more removal in different nature type of path. They're like, yeah, you have these 36 pieces, but this one's too specific. This one just hits creatures, and it being in your deck's kind of funny, but not good. they hammered that I needed more removal, sense of specific removals too niche.
Which can make sense because metas are very dependent on different aspects, such as the Renaissance. You probably did want a little bit more of the creature removal and not necessarily artifact or enchantment. But at the same time, somebody brought their Rocco deck and, oh, hey, you probably needed to pivot a little bit more into that artifact hate instead of just creature. So I can definitely see where they're coming from. And that's just going to be meta dependent. / also just understanding proper threat assessment, which even pro players still struggle with because you don't necessarily know the exact pivot point that will mean win and lose at a very precise level when it gets to that higher bracket.
I think back on it, and of the amount left that I had mentioned outside of the 15, I think we're more experienced players. They couldn't have quite pieced together what the deck was doing enough to understand I had more and just didn't have resources. They kind of saw that I kept enough mana open to do something, but not quite enough to do everything. And then once they got the back end and be like, oh, this is where it's kind of like waggling their finger at it, like, you silly goose. You thought you had me type deal. The more interesting dynamic was the final 12, the group of people who did not have that opinion. I honestly thought it would be more than 12. I thought for sure there would be more than 12 out of 50 that would think, yeah, you had plenty or too much.
Yeah.
It was really shocking.
I mean, you can't account for everybody, and especially with different people's opinions. Sometimes you're just going to get that.
Of the 12 people in the experiment where I went and asked the questions and they're like, yeah, you had way too much removal. 7 of them were negative, and the remaining 5 were between positive and overwhelmingly positive. The 7 that were negative in this particular experiment, they were very harsh because they were disrupted by the removal the most. They looked at the control archetype at a very negative facet, just a very bad light and all. When we went through the motions, I had the game conversation. 3 of the 7 felt the compulsion to apologize. They're like, sorry, I have dealt with lots of control players. And they had to like take a step back and realize they were actively very upset just at the idea of having so much removal in a deck, period. They were very irate with the idea of having so many answers to all of the things. It gave them the feeling that of the actually guy who puts up their glasses, comes with a bunch of facts that are wrong about your favorite show, is how they described it.
Actually, I'm going to remove your piece.
So, like, they even did the action. Like, they put their fingers to their face and did the, actually, that's not going to work because I'm going to remove your stuff. Like, they were very animated about it. Like I said, they had to take a breather, just not about it.
What can we probably take away from this experiment? What might we see if we expanded it out from just 50 games to 100, 200, be ambitious and try to do 1,000?
My current conclusion is that the idea of saying you need more removal is a little flawed and a bit skewed. I look at it the same vein as taking wisdom from Sun Tzu, where there is wisdom in saying that removal is important and that you should have at least some. There is science to dictate you need an amount of it. But I think just standing here and screaming, yeah, add more removal is not the answer, because it might have some wisdom, but if you don't understand where that wisdom comes from, it kind of falls flat on its face.
Do you agree with that, Levi? Because I'm pretty sure you're our big removal guy over there.
I think with removal, a lot of times it's working smarter, not harder. Having removal that is versatile enough to take care of the problems you think you're going to see, when blending in enough of efficient enough removal that it's lower mana, so you're not having to waste turns holding up mana for something that you may not actually use. That's kind of why I like flash creatures and stuff like that, things I can can hold up a removal spell, and then if I don't need to use it, let me at least get something out of this turn. Letting somebody get scary so the attention kind of deviates to them instead of you. With that as well as you have to know where you're going. You still have to have a game plan. Some game plans are, I'm going to try to just eat as much removal as possible and just work through it and just try to overpower the board. I have decks that try to do that and just kind of take advantage of spot removal, but just I don't think it'll be enough. And I've got decks that spot removal really wouldn't bother me too much at all, like Narset. I have one creature in the entire deck and it's hexproof. And it's just going to be really hard to get to everything. I think it really depends. I think it's a matter of knowing your deck. Statistically speaking, we do see precons come in at that around 13. It gives them around a 20% or so probability of having 3 within their first 6 turns of the game. You have the ability to remove 3 threats. If I'm running a lot of removal spells, like my Brago deck's up to, I think, around 22 pieces of interaction, I have a about 51% chance or higher of having 3 pieces of removal at least in the first 6 turns. It's probably going to be more, so I can be a little bit more loosey-goosey of what I want to target or bounce or tap down. And in a deck that's running a lot less, maybe like 7 or 8, because it's like a dragon type of deck, I need to hold that stuff up. This is going to win the game if I don't answer it. But the most important thing is you can remove all the pieces of equipment or creatures or whatever you want, but if you're not actually moving towards a win condition, it's kind of like playing a life gain deck without a combo or win con at the end. You're going to build up a massive life total. You're going to get to a spot where you're top decking, you have 60 life, and someone has a whole board, and they're just going to chip at you for like 3-4 turns and win the game. I look at removal as kind of like a Mario Kart game. I'm using stuff to try to stop people, but I have to be moving my car myself. I've got to keep going towards the finish line or for this to mean anything. If not, it's kind of a wasting everyone's time.
And I'm going to just reiterate that it seems like this phrase definitely comes up when a meta is not being understood at a table. And specifically, you could be running the best removal in the world. If it is not timely, people are going to say that you're not running enough removal. If it is always there and always timely, some people, like the 12, will say that, yeah, you probably have enough. But even so, we can see that at least at lower brackets, enough removal is not enough with 36. Sometimes you just need to make them have it themselves and focus a little bit on your game plan, like Levi said.
If you can have a removal spell in some capacity that works towards your game plan, those are worth their weight in gold. If you have a destroy target artifact or enchantment and you can play a land from your hand, it's a landfall deck. Those are awesome. You get to slow somebody down a little bit, and then you also get to progress your game plan at the same time.
Or if they provide any kind of card advantage to you after you use them, because sometimes you need to just replace that removal piece immediately.
And there's something to be said that you shouldn't feel shamed out of having more removal. You just should be cognitive of the line where what really defines enough.
I mean, I'm going to still shame Levi for having 22 pieces in Brago. You saw me physically recoil when I heard him say that.
Yeah, that man was cringing. I could feel his soul shriveling.
And a lot of those are repeatable too.
But, yeah, that's the problem.
A lot of them aren't, though. The deck has addressed that if a Topa Orb comes into play, I need to have a way to answer that, or else the deck's not going to do anything. There's a lot of different things you have to realize what your deck's doing, how it can be stopped, what type of decks are going to be really bad matchups for you, and then put your removal in place accordingly. But just remember, if the average precon commander deck is running like 13 removal right now, and you're running less than that, you need to have a reason why.
If you're going to be removal light, understand what you're doing.
My answer is be like Brian Kibler. Make them have it. I'm going to keep doing this value engine. What you going to do about it, punk?
Just knowing what you're about. And then at that point, if they go, you should run removal, look at them and be like, I like Brian Kibler. Choo choo.
I'm going to make you have it. I would like to make 8 Field of the Deads. How are you going to respond there, bud?
Armageddon.
I would like to pick up your Field of the Dead and floss my teeth. Does it resolve?
Judge?
Yeah. No, it's an uncard. Trust. Anyways, that's pretty much all the time we got, guys.
Any of these final thoughts for us?
I think, for me, with your removal, have it be part of your game plan. Unless you're running like a a control deck or something that like worries about crimes where you have to commit a bunch of crimes to get your value. But like removal should be an enhancement of your deck. It shouldn't be the end goal. It is the way your deck plays defense. It is important to have. It is important to be able to use. Just try to find the right removal for what you're trying to do.
My final thought is figure out what the core concepts mean in Magic. When people say add more removal, really dive into what they are trying to tell you, not just face value.
Disregard removal. Full synergy, choo-choo all the way. They cannot have enough removal if you just keep presenting threats.
Okay,
That is
Simic,
great
calm
advice.
down.
If you're a Magic Hall of Famer.
And guess what? He got there.
Well, this has been a pleasure, guys. I'm Jacobi.
I'm Levi.
And I'm Joe.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Just run more threats.